Hello, this is Jason from Fix My Books, and again back this week doing a tax comparison for Ontario and Florida, and part 4 this week, which is the cost of housing and expenses. So in the first week we did comparing the different tax brackets, and you can see the drastically different tax brackets between the United States and Canada, as well as the provincial/state brackets. In part 2, we discussed what the taxes were that you'd pay on $100,000 of US income versus 140,000 Canadian dollars, which is the exchange rate at the time of recording all this. Part 3, last week, we looked at what the cost of healthcare. So because taxes in Ontario and Canada generally include the cost of healthcare, we wanted to sort of equate this between the two so it would be a more equitable comparison. And this one was actually reasonably surprising. Part 4, housing and expenses. That's the one we're getting into now. And then next week, we're going to do high income probabilities. So what is your probability of earning this type of income? So what about the expenses? Well, I took some of these from Zillow, Realtor, expatisan.com, and they're just very basic. So they're not going to be like all of the expenses you encounter. It would just be like literal survival at this point. And then we're going to have a look at sales tax rates and those kind of other expenses that you'd pay for. But at the time of recording this, unfortunately, our Canadian dollar is doing badly, to say the least. But anyway, it makes it quite easy for a comparison because it's so flat. But let's get into this. So the expenses that I'm talking about are going to be rent. So it's not going to be owning a property because that's going to be determined, by another factor, which is like mortgage rates a little more. And I really don't want to do an analysis with that. Phones, so no device, and we're comparing Bell and T-Mobile. Internet, Bell, T-Mobile again. And this is sort of like a keto, heavy meat, and just bread diet. So you're kind of like living good and bad, as well as utilities. So these are the properties firstly. So this is the postal code, 33137, which is Miami. And then this is basically the center of Toronto. We're looking at $3,315 per month for 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom on Zillow. And I found another one on Zillow, which is $4,350 per month, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,300 square feet. So the square feet is roughly similar, 166 square feet larger in Florida than you're getting in Toronto. And unfortunately, there's a person living in the basement. So, what can you do about that? There's a troll in the basement. That's the difficult thing about trying to find properties that you can compare in Toronto versus Florida, because in Florida, they don't really have basements, but also, you don't have other people living in there. In Canada, it is very common for the house to be split up. It's the same in Australia, with other people living in the house. That's not as common a thing that I find in places like Florida or Miami. All right, so we'll just get started. But you can see here, after we went through, last week's video, the cost of what you're going to have at the end of the day, including the healthcare and all the taxes, it's sort of very, very similar. So you can even see here, when you're not taking the spousal amount or 30300, line 30300, you're getting $101,633 versus $99,869 if you file MFS in Florida. So you're kind of $2,000 away there. It's 2%. It's not drastically different. You're getting a little bit more if you file MFJ and taking the spousal amount or not taking the spousal amount. So MFJ really has its tax advantages. And per month, you're netting out very, very similar. So a few $100s difference every month But, a few $100s could end up being quite a few $1,000s at the end of the year, which, we can see that it is. But when we're looking at rent, in Canada, for $350 for the whole house, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom. Well, not whole house, but you know what I mean. $100 for the phone versus $112. Very, very similar in terms of the price. And these ones here, remember, Canadian dollars, and these are the US dollar equivalents, just so we can get a real like-for-like comparison. Internet, slightly higher in Canada. 12 eggs, $6 a day. That was Canada. But yeah, $540. And the price of the eggs and the chicken seem to be quite similar. So yeah, you're getting a very heavy protein, heavy fat content diet with some carbs thrown in, and this was the Canadian amount. But yeah, there's a bit of bread in there as well. Very, very basic, like I said. And the cost of utilities seem to be a bit higher, actually, in Florida than Canada. But I don't know. I think this is the cost of utilities in Canada, not including taxes via expatriation. So this is the actual cost of what the utilities are. So I could imagine if you even look at my utility bill, it would be something like this per month across all the different utilities, and then double in terms of the taxes and everything else that need to be input. So I have a feeling that this is just an amount that they've given, which is the actual cost of utilities, not including all our exorbitant, ridiculous taxes that are included by supplying those utilities. So this could really go from 322 up to, 650 nearly. So much higher than Florida, but it is what it is. I'm just going off the data that was there. So when you look at it after expenses, this is what you have left over, and it's still coming out fairly similar if you're married filing jointly and you're not taking the spousal amount. $300 difference or so, $350, but it's like $600 difference between Ontario and Florida, Canadian dollars equivalent. So you're actually netting out better in Ontario. And also, a lot of these things, so these would include taxes, this would not include taxes, this would include taxes, this wouldn't include taxes. A lot of these things may have, 13% added onto them, but we've just excluded that for this example, and we're just looking at this expatriation thing because these would also exclude the taxes on them. So you're kind of getting a like-for-like comparison. And yeah, you're ending up actually better off in Ontario, which is surprising if you're filing, whether or not you're filing with the spousal amount. But you can see if you're married filing separately in Florida, you're taking home 50% less. It's more than 50% less. You're way worse off. And then you've got your other expenses that you're going to have to factor in at sales tax rate of 13%. I've put 7 for this being Miami, and the reason why is because you've got the 6% Florida taxes, and then you've got local taxes as well that you need to add on to that. You may be buying some stuff in Miami, you may be going outside of Miami, whatever. But what is the range like in Toronto versus Miami? So we looked at these homes here and we're thinking, okay, that's kind of the average of what you're going to be paying, $4,600 or $4,350. No, not really. So these are just ones that I selected first up that were like in the middle, that met these requirements, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, that were roughly the same square feet, right? Not whether or not they're nice, not whether or not they have, furniture in them or whatever. It was just very tough for me to find something without someone living in the basement. It was actually, I couldn't find anything, and you'll see why in a moment. But we're going to go through the next lot of this, and you're going to see what the range is actually like. So to get the sort of key right on this and what you can sort of look at, this is the starting point for the 50-kilometer range key on Florida, and this is what Ontario kind of looks like when it hits that 50-kilometer mark as well. And so Zillow is obviously the one for the US, and we've got Canada here. So we'll just look at Canada first, and what we're going to do is we're going to look for residentials, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, plus, house, detached, obviously. And this is where it gets quite annoying because you cannot actually filter out whole house and just rent for the whole house. So let's sort of match this up. So what's that looking like now? Oop. Oh, it doesn't let me get in that. No, it doesn't let me get in the middle. So yeah, you got, let's just call it 6,000, between 6 and 7,000 listings. All right, so 6,000 listings, 7,000 listings roughly. But yeah, you don't want to be including Montreal, obviously. So let's go lowest price first. All right, we're trying to find 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, home to rent, detached. And you know, what's kind of the base you can get at? Oh, look, everything's room, basement, room, blah, 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 blah. So this is the biggest problem with this, and why I can really struggle to find an actual home that I want to rent or find a floor for the home. So let's just I'll just show you how bad this is. So let's go to 25, right? Looking at $1,800 a month in Canada, in Ontario, $1,800. Oh, look, they're all basement, lower, etc. You cannot find, let's go to 35. You really can't find anything which isn't just someone else's basement or the upper level only. It's all shared housing. You cannot rent the whole house. Let's just go to 50. Basement, lower. This might be, but I bet you it won't be. Apartment. Oh, look, basement. So I'm on the 50 mark now, right? I can't go any further. I have to actually go back to highest price, right? And then you have some ridiculous prices like $60,000 a month, which I'm sure everybody has available, which you'll see in part 5 of my analysis, how hard it is to actually get $50,000 a month. But yeah, you struggle to find a whole house for, let's go back, what was that lowest price? Lowest, and we'll go to 50. $2,000 a month, right? You can't even find anything for a whole house, $2,000 a month in Ontario. You're going to have to just assume that it starts somewhere, obviously, but I've usually seen these $2,300, $2,500 sometimes, depending on where it is, like down this area, sometimes this area, 23, 25. That kind of is the starting point for a whole house. And you're several hundred kilometers away from Toronto at this point. So let's go look at the range and compare that with the US. All right, payment low to high. So here's a whole house, $600 a month. Not an incredibly nice house, probably in the middle of nowhere, but yeah, say middle of nowhere, but near Jacksonville. But it's not even in Florida. Georgia, sorry, I shouldn't have. Florida. No, there you go. Whole house, $800 a month. Half the square footage of something that's the average sort of thing in Ontario, which is about 1,000 square feet for a house. But it is what you've just got range, right? You've always got range. Let's filter this a little more. Does it work if I just do that? No, it doesn't let me do that. But you just have so much range in terms of what you want to rent. So if I just scroll down a bit so that I'm not including Georgia. But, just as an example, 26 to 1,000, and I'm not even scrolled out the correct amount. 27,000. You just have so much range in the US in terms of what you actually want to rent. So if you want to rent something at $8.95 a month, save some money, it's doable. You don't have to be paying $4,000 a month, like I was saying earlier. You can rent something quite cheaply. Like, let's go in 1,100 square foot home. This is a very common size, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom in Ontario. $1,350 a month is $1,890 Canadian. So that's drastically different than the floor of $2,300, $2,400 that you get in Ontario. So you have a lot more versatility, a lot more optionality in terms of what it is that you want to spend money on in the United States versus Canada. In Canada, you just seem to have this floor, and there's nowhere else to go from that point. It's only up. You can only pay more money. So that was an example of what some of the range was like in terms of life. So when you look at things like this, whilst we're getting an equivalent amount of rent, you can easily get this up to $2,300 just by simply taking that $600 less home. You can easily get this down $2,000. You can easily get this down to $3,000, and then you're better off in Florida. But it is, what do you want to do in terms of options? The floor with this is $2,300, $2,400, $2,500, whereas the floor with this is even $800, $900, which is US. So let's just do 800 times 1.4, $1,120. So you can still be $1,000 better off here if you really decide to live very minimally, and that's a good and a bad thing, but you just have that option. So let's talk about $1,000 plus sales tax expenses per month. So here it is. So you're paying $1,000 across, so 1,000 Canadian dollars, and then you've got the sales tax, 13% on top, 7% here, and this is the sales tax you're paying, and this is the annual sales tax that you're going to have to pay for your. So you're going to be paying $1,500 in sales tax in Ontario versus $840 of sales tax in Florida. So nearly double, obviously, based on the percentages, nearly double. And that's just more tax out of your pocket that's going towards, spending. So let's compare what happens with all the taxes are paid, right? You've got here, again, with the basic personal amount claimed, without, married filing jointly Canadian dollars, married filing jointly US dollars, married filing separately Canadian dollars, and US dollars. So total taxes paid, including the healthcare costs, because again, like we said in part 3, the healthcare costs included in our taxes in Ontario, basically one for every dollar you pay is going towards healthcare. Whereas in the US, this is the amount you're going to have to pay, which includes sort of a credit as well, a tax credit. So to reduce the amount of taxes, to reduce the amount of healthcare costs. So this is what you're going to be paying net. And this is what you're paying. So you're paying $40,000 in taxes in Ontario to $44,000. Whereas in Florida, you're paying about $35,000 to $43,000, $44,000. So and that's Canadian dollars. So you're generally paying quite a bit of money difference in Ontario versus married filing jointly in the States. However, you see that sort of evaporate when you do decide to do married filing separately. And I mean, they're basically one for one if you're not taking the basic personal amount. So there we go. It actually ends up being very, very similar. It's not drastically different like everyone says. However, this is on $100,000 US dollars / $140,000 of Canadian income. But what are you actually left over with, right? So this is what we're looking at here. So you've got your amounts for Ontario, and then the amount different filing types in Florida, in Canadian and US dollars. And after the expenses, you know, there was quite a bit of difference between this amount here, these amounts in Ontario, and married filing separately. I mean, it's $1,000, it's double the amount. And then we've got to include the sales taxes as well per month. And this is what your monthly amount left over is. So if you're married filing separately, you're basically breaking even. Married filing jointly in Florida, you're couple hundred dollars or a few $100 better off. In Ontario, you're actually getting double the amount of an MFJ, and so annually you've got $14,000 worth of room to play with on Ontario versus in the US. But like I said before, you have to take this with a grain of salt, because you have the ability to just have different options in the US, whereas in Canada, like, you've got a floor when it comes to your housing, because housing is obviously a very expensive and very costly part of someone's monthly budget. So when it comes to Canada, your floor is $2,300 living in Ontario. Let's just call it $2,300. In Florida, that can be $1,000, just over $1,000. So Canadian as well. So you're able to reduce the cost of where you're living by 50% in Florida versus Ontario. Yes, it might be more dangerous, but at the moment, you know, both places they have their issues. You know, both places always have their issues. But you theoretically could get this up to $14,000 quite easily, very easily actually, and surpass this. So you could increase this by $40,000 simply by living very, very cheaply in a very low cost area, because you could, you know, really reduce your housing costs in Florida. In Ontario, $24,000 a year, so $2,000 a month. So you've got about 38,000 here. You'd have 47,000 roughly. So a lot of range in Florida, not much in Ontario. So that was the cost of housing and expenses, and we've obviously done the cost of healthcare and the taxes you actually pay on $100,000 versus $140,000. Now we've factored everything in, and you know, we've compared the different tax brackets. We've seen what you've got to pay on $100,000 US dollars, 140,000 CAD. We've compared and factored in the cost of healthcare, factored in the cost of housing expenses, and it ends up being pretty similar, but there's a lot more versatility in Florida. Now, this is actually the important one. What is your probability that you could actually earn this amount of money, right? So this is where a lot of this narrative is going, of like things being equal, is going to fall apart. This is where you're going to be shocked. So stay tuned to this one. If you want to give a comment, like, subscribe, feel free. If you want to give us an idea about what else to compare, you know, feel free. We're happy to do it. Thanks.